Welcome back. Today marks International Day of the Eradication of Poverty. The World Bank says COVID-19 has pushed over 100 million people into poverty, the majority from sub-Saharan countries. Southern Africa Resource Watch says Africa is not using its resources properly. Let's discuss this further with the organization's director, Claude Kabemba. Thank you very much, Mr. Kabemba, for your time. Now, first of all, we know that COVID-19 has actually caused a lot of people to lose their jobs and a lot of people to actually fall into the poverty line. Why is sub-Saharan Africa, the area that is always so mostly affected?
It's because we were not prepared. We did not have sufficient resources to fight against COVID-19. So most of African countries have to depend on donation, even for masks and from outside, which question our capacity to generate and mobilize revenue locally. And that's start to speak to what do we do or what we are doing with the abundant mineral resources we are having. If those resources are properly utilized, we would have faced COVID-19 in a much stronger position. So if, in fact, if we do not deal with COVID-19, that will pose serious challenge to our economies.
Now, of course, you do say, your organization does say that the reason sub-Saharan Africa also didn't survive is because we don't use our resources correctly. But a lot of people would say in Africa, most of our resources are actually even dealt with mostly by the West. You know, we don't really own our resources anymore because of the history.
No, I think we need to stop the blaming game. We've been independent over 5 decades. For some countries, it's now 60 years of independence. What we have not been able to do is to change the regime, the model which we use to extract and to trade in these resources. Instead of transforming these resources on the continent so that we expand our capacity to optimize revenues and industrialize using the resources, we have not done that. That is the biggest problem we have. So instead of, we only look at collecting royalties from these minerals. And that is a very minimalistic policy. I think what we should have been doing is to invest in industrial policy, where we create a number of industries that are linked to our mining sector to ensure that we are able to absorb unemployment. It's only when we give employment to African people that we'll be able to deal with poverty in a more forceful way.
Now, Mr. Kabemba, especially particularly here in my country, for instance, we've had quite a lot of problems with corruption. Could that also be another reason why we are not surviving during these hard times? I mean, even in 2008, we actually didn't survive in our economy because of what was happening around the world. And now we find ourselves here again. And in my country, we've had a health minister who is found wanting when it comes to, the tenders that were given for PPE. As low as that. So could that be also the other issue why we don't find ourselves improving because of the corruption happening in some of our countries?
Yes, it's a big problem across the continent that revenues from the mining sector is been diverted for personal use, especially by the political elites across the continent. As you know, $88 billion get out of the continent in an illicit way. And that money, if it's properly used, it can really take us forward in terms of dealing with poverty. So one of the biggest problems is exactly that, because that poverty, that corruption does not provide sufficient time for our leaders to think. They lack empathy to think for other people, because if they had time, we could even take that money that they steal to invest it in more productive areas. We are losing a lot through poverty. And one of the challenges we have is to have more patriotic leadership across the continent. We have very few leaders in, who are thinking about people. Really, when you consider the abundance of resources we have, and you look at the level of poverty, really it's a sin that we can be in such a situation. And it's an indictment to our leaders that we cannot continue to divert resources that must go to the marginalized, the poor, for our own personal benefits and our families. That is the biggest challenge the continent is facing. But beyond that, I think we need to insist that we need to diversify our economies, not just in the mining sector, but even in the agriculture. We need to ensure that we build backward and forward linkages that will provide sufficient base for us to create jobs and to provide food for our people. Look, when you take the case of the mining sector, just the policy of local content. Most of our countries have adopted local content policies to ensure that communities where mining are taking place can provide services to these mining companies. But we are failing to implement even that basic policy where we can force mining companies to accept services from these communities. And when you do that, communities start to build small companies that employ people. And it's a multi-billion sector that can really help, especially mining communities, to tap into the benefits of the mining sector.
All right, Mr. Kabemba, you know, a lot of the things that you've said, I couldn't agree with you more, especially in terms of the blame game that some of our government officials still play when it comes to resources that are not being given to the poor. Thank you very much. Claude Kabemba, Director at the Southern Africa Resource Watch.